A routine court appearance for Rep. Sir Jasmine Crockett erupted into chaos this morning after a fiery exchange with Judge Anthony Thomas revealed cracks in the courtroom's integrity. What began as a minor legal matter may now shake the very foundation of judicial trust in Texas. It was supposed to be a procedural hiccup, nothing more. Jasmine Crockett, the firebrand U.S. representative for Texas's 30th Congressional District, had appeared before the Dallas County Courthouse over a parking citation dispute tied to a misregistered government vehicle assigned to her congressional office. The issue, initially clerical in nature, stemmed from a state-owned sedan mistakenly logged under a civilian license plate. It was, by all accounts, the kind of thing resolved with a signature and a shrug. But this morning's proceedings were anything but typical. From the moment Crockett entered Courtroom 7B, the atmosphere shifted. Reporters who had shown up for more significant criminal cases found themselves turning their cameras toward the unlikely drama unfolding at the far end of the docket. Judge Anthony Thomas, known for his rigid adherence to courtroom decorum and a reputation for veiled partisanship, was already on the bench, glasses perched low, mouth drawn tight, an expression that mixed disdain with self-satisfaction. What began as a question of improper registration took a sharp, almost jarring turn. Thomas, speaking in a tone better suited to a disciplinary hearing than a minor traffic matter, interrupted Crockett's attorney multiple times, questioning the legitimacy of her government vehicle assignment and implying abuse of power. Crockett, composed but clearly taken aback, rose to address the judge directly, a move not typically made for something this minor. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "Your Honor," she began, "this is a minor procedural error involving my staff and a Texas Department of Transportation records mix-up. There's no need to escalate this beyond what it is." But Judge Thomas leaned forward, his voice clipped and loud enough to echo. "No one in this courtroom is above the law, Congresswoman, especially not someone who seems to have trouble keeping her office affairs in order." There was a quiet gasp from the gallery. Reporters' pens scratched faster. The courtroom buzzed. Crockett didn't flinch. "Respectfully, sir, if this court wants to discuss integrity, let's make sure we're having the right conversation." That's when things began to unravel. Over the next 45 minutes, Judge Thomas made what onlookers described as thinly veiled swipes at Crockett's political affiliations, referencing a congresswoman who spends more time on Twitter than doing her job, and even questioning whether her legal credentials gave her the right to speak as an officer of the court. It wasn't just inappropriate, it was personal. Crockett, who had practiced law for years before entering politics, chose her moment carefully. She leaned into the microphone, slow and composed. "Your Honor, I came here to resolve a clerical citation. What I did not come here for was a politically motivated cross-examination on my legitimacy as a public servant." At this point, murmurs began building in the courtroom. Thomas's bailiff exchanged glances with the court reporter. But then came the first crack in the judge's carefully controlled persona. When Crockett's legal aide attempted to present documents showing the vehicle's reassignment, Thomas refused to admit the evidence. "Not relevant," he barked. "You'll find this court does not take kindly to late-stage cover-ups." "Cover-up?" Crockett said, raising an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting forgery?" "I'd advise you tread carefully, Your Honor." Thomas didn't respond. Instead, he made a hasty motion to move forward with a punitive fine and a formal admonishment to be placed in Crockett's congressional ethics file, a move well beyond the court's jurisdiction. That's when it happened. Crockett, now entirely unconvinced that this was simply courtroom bluster, reached for a folder in her briefcase. "Your Honor, since you seem uninterested in the facts of this case, I feel compelled to enter a different kind of evidence into the record. Evidence I wasn't planning on using today." She held up a printed email chain, each message stamped and time-stamped. "I have reason to believe that you, Judge Thomas, had contact with a known political operative just 2 days ago regarding my court appearance. These emails, sent from an encrypted local account, suggest foreknowledge of my citation and outline a plan to hold Jasmine accountable. Not legally, but politically. Gasps erupted. The bailiff took a step forward but paused when Crockett's aide lifted a phone showing the metadata backup. Judge Thomas's mouth opened, but no words came out. Crockett placed the emails on the clerk's desk. "This court may not be interested in late-stage cover-ups," she said. "But I sure as hell am interested in early-stage corruption." The room fell dead silent. A moment later, Thomas recessed the court for 10 minutes, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. As reporters surged out of the courtroom to break the story, Crockett remained seated, arms folded, eyes fixed on the bench. What started as a simple court date had just become something much larger, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. As the courtroom door slammed shut behind Judge Anthony Thomas, the echo lingered, vibrating off the marble walls like the tail end of a warning shot. Inside, the gallery buzzed with an energy just shy of chaos. Camera phones were raised. Whispers turned into muttered questions. Even the bailiff, usually a granite statue of stoicism, glanced toward the bench with uncertainty. Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She sat perfectly still at the defense table, eyes locked on the empty judge's seat, fingers steepled beneath her chin. She knew what had just happened. The judge hadn't recessed to deliberate. He'd recessed because he was rattled. Her aide leaned in. "Jas, those emails, you sure you want to go there now?" She didn't look at him. "He brought me here to humiliate me in front of cameras. I'm just returning the favor. But this time, with receipts." 10 minutes passed, then 15. Judge Thomas did not return. Instead, his clerk reappeared, frazzled and wide-eyed. "We're going to reconvene shortly," she announced, her voice strained. "The court appreciates your patience." Crockett stood up, smoothed her jacket, and turned to the gallery. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. "This court doesn't need patience," she said. "It needs integrity." The doors opened again. Judge Thomas stepped in, but he was not alone. A second figure walked behind him. Judge Miriam Reed, the presiding judge for the district, someone rarely seen outside of appeals. Her presence was the judicial equivalent of a 5-alarm fire. Thomas returned to the bench slowly, face stiff, the corners of his mouth twitching in what might have been fury or panic. Judge Reed took a seat in the jury box, arms crossed. "All rise," the bailiff intoned, though it felt less ceremonial than cautionary. Thomas cleared his throat. "Congresswoman Crockett, before we proceed, I want to caution you that the introduction of personal communications with the intent of exposing corruption," she interrupted, "is not just allowable, it's necessary. And I suggest you choose your next words carefully, Your Honor, because you're no longer the only one listening." Thomas's face darkened. "This is my courtroom." "Not anymore," Reed cut in coolly. "For the duration of this hearing, I will be observing closely. Any further motion, escalation, or evidentiary dispute will be reviewed at the appellate level, should cause arise. Proceed." Crockett stepped forward, lifting the printed emails again. This string includes communications between Judge Thomas and a man named Everett Langston, a known Republican strategist affiliated with several dark money PACs, including those that have run smear campaigns against me in the last election. Cycle. She passed copies to the court clerk, who hesitated, then handed them off to Judge Reed. These messages show Langston sending Thomas a calendar invite titled Jazz Court Day, Opportunity, 2 days before this citation was even listed in public record. In one message, Langston writes, "You wanted your moment? She's all yours Friday. Make it count." That's not judicial preparation. That's political collusion. Reed's face was unreadable as she scanned the pages. Thomas, on the other hand, looked like a man trapped in a room with no exits. "This isn't admissible," Thomas muttered, though it sounded more like a hope than a ruling. No? Crockett tilted her head. Then I move to enter it not as part of this citation hearing, but as evidence for a formal ethics complaint and request for judicial review. I'm not just defending myself anymore. I'm putting the system on notice. The room practically tilted. Thomas's gavel slammed down, cracking like thunder. This court will take another recess. But Judge Reed stood before he could rise. No, Anthony, you're not running this court today. Her voice was hard now. You're staying right here. Crockett stepped forward, turning toward the gallery and the scattered reporters frantically texting. This isn't just about me. It's about a judge who believes he can use his bench as a political weapon. And that belief isn't born from nowhere. It's nurtured, fed, and protected by a party that's allowed corruption to masquerade as patriotism. This court, this system, was never meant to be a weapon. But that's what some have turned it into. Reporters began live streaming. One camera caught Judge Thomas sinking deeper into his seat. For years, Republicans have allowed the courts to be packed with partisan operatives who hide behind robes while pushing agendas. They talk about law and order, but they bend the law and order chaos when it suits them. Today, I came here to clear up a parking citation. What I found was a judge trying to use his position to undermine me. Not because I broke the law, but because I speak truth to power. The gallery burst into quiet applause. Rare, possibly inappropriate, but no one stopped it. Reed turned to the bailiff. Retrieve an IT forensics specialist from the administrative office. We're confirming the email chain. Thomas stood now, voice high and breaking slightly. This is outrageous. This is a... Enough, Reed barked. Sit down, Judge. Thomas, or I'll have you removed. The room froze. Crockett, arms at her sides, stood like a pillar, unshaken. Thomas slowly sat, but the damage was done. His reputation, once solid if controversial, was visibly disintegrating in real time. And the worst part for him? This wasn't over. Not even close. The air in courtroom 7B was now more electric than tense. Something seismic was shifting. What had begun as a bureaucratic flicker now roared like an approaching storm, each second threatening to upend the already fractured illusion of judicial neutrality. Judge Anthony Thomas sat rigid behind the bench, his jaw clenched so tight it seemed his own teeth might betray him. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett stood with the poise of someone who knew she had more than just the truth. She had the moment. Judge Miriam Reed had not moved from the jury box. Her eyes stayed on Thomas like a hawk's, not blinking, not breathing harder than necessary. She was in full presiding mode now, her authority filling the room in a way Thomas's gavel no longer could. Let's proceed, Reed said. Ms. Crockett, you were about to submit additional materials? Crockett nodded and motioned for her aide, who passed forward a thumb drive and a printed binder. Your Honor, in addition to the emails already entered into potential evidence, we have metadata files, server logs, and screenshots confirming that Judge Thomas accessed a private email account registered to ajthomas7protonmail.com, which, according to the Texas Office of Court Administration's own cybersecurity team, violates digital communication protocol for judicial officials. A collective inhale swept the gallery. Thomas visibly flinched. That email was never supposed to surface, and certainly not in open court. Reed looked at the drive, then glanced toward her clerk. Get this to IT. Thomas couldn't sit anymore. He rose again, a trembling finger pointing at Crockett. This is a political ambush. She's grandstanding, weaponizing this court to make a spectacle. None of this has been authenticated. This is a coordinated smear campaign. Crockett didn't blink. You want to talk coordination? Let's talk about the fact that Everett Langston contributed the maximum allowable donation to your reappointment campaign last year, then hosted a fundraiser with 3 PACs that have actively targeted black legislators. Let's talk about how you've dismissed 3 complaints against Republican-aligned defendants in the last 18 months. each after late-night meetings logged in the courthouse entry records. We can talk coordination all day, Judge. Just be ready for what it uncovers. The heat in Thomas's face had risen past red to something almost violet. Sweat gathered at his temples. His voice, once so confident and theatrical, cracked again. You're twisting facts. You're turning this into a circus. Crockett took a deliberate step toward the bench. No, sir. You turned it into a circus when you decided you could turn a parking citation into political theater. I just brought the receipts. The courtroom doors opened again. A young woman in a navy blazer entered, flanked by two IT personnel. They carried a laptop and a small portable screen. She whispered something to Judge Reed, who nodded. Reed turned to the room. We have a preliminary review of the metadata from the thumb drive. Based on this analysis, the email account in question was accessed from a courthouse IP address assigned to Judge Thomas's chambers. The last login occurred at 10:17 a.m. this morning, 20 minutes before this hearing began. The room fell silent again. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was evidence. Thomas shook his head slowly, muttering to himself. You people have no idea what you're doing. Reed raised a brow. You people? Crockett smiled, cold, knowing. There it is. Reed stood, folding her hands in front of her. Judge Thomas, based on what's been presented here, I am formally recommending an emergency review by the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct. Pending their investigation, I am suspending you from presiding over any cases effective immediately. The words hit the room like a shotgun blast. Thomas dropped into his seat like he'd been pushed. You can't suspend me. This is my courtroom. Not anymore, Reed said, echoing her earlier words. This courtroom belongs to the people of Texas, and they deserve better than this. From the back of the courtroom, someone clapped, then another, and then the gallery erupted into an uncontainable swell of applause and raised phones, recording every second of the unraveling. But Crockett wasn't smiling for the cameras. She turned back to face the room, gaze sweeping across the faces. Some stunned, some inspired, all watching her now not as a defendant, but as a challenger to a broken system. Let me be clear, she said, raising her voice so it carried to every wall. This isn't about me or even about Judge Thomas. This is about a rot that's been allowed to spread unchecked through our justice system. It's about the way power shields itself, how it punishes dissent and rewards obedience. This isn't just one courtroom. This is the country. This is what happens when partisanship infects the bench and justice becomes a tool for revenge. Reed didn't stop her. The Republican Party, Crockett continued, has stood by as judges like Thomas use their gavels to settle political scores, not legal disputes. They've allowed corruption to take root in the very place we turn to for fairness. And let's be honest, they encouraged it. Because it serves them. Another round of applause. Louder this time. This has to stop. We need transparency, oversight, and accountability. Starting here, starting now. Reed nodded slowly. And that may just be the beginning. Just then the court officer re-entered, this time with a quiet urgency. He walked up to Judge Reed and whispered something that made her eyes narrow. She looked over at Thomas. Judge Thomas, the commission has been informed. Effective immediately. You are to be escorted from the courthouse. Do not return to this bench without written clearance from the review board. He opened his mouth again, this time not in protest, but in disbelief. You're actually doing this? He said, voice hoarse. Crockett stepped aside, arms folded. No, Judge, you did this. I'm just the one who refused to stay quiet about it. The bailiff approached him slowly. And for the first time that day, Thomas didn't argue. He just stood, unsteady, humiliated, and followed the bailiff through the side exit as the cameras caught every step. For a brief moment, the courtroom felt like a vacuum, soundless and suspended in disbelief. Then, like a rubber band snapping back into place, everything began to move again. Reporters shouted questions. Phones buzzed. The rhythm of a system stirring from its slumber started to pulse through the courthouse hallways. Judge Anthony Thomas, once a symbol of iron-fisted judicial authority, was gone. Not quietly, not cleanly, but definitively. Jasmine Crockett remained still. She didn't celebrate. She didn't grandstand. She knew better than to mistake one exposed fraud for a reformed system. And she knew exactly how quickly institutions, especially judicial ones, like to pretend accountability was a one-time event. The work wasn't done, but today had been a crack in the wall. And for the first time in a long time, that wall looked breakable. Judge Miriam Reed cleared her throat as the bailiff shut the door behind Thomas. "I will now officially dismiss this matter from the court record," she said. Congresswoman, Crockett's citation is voided as a result of procedural misconduct and judicial impropriety. The docket will reflect that no wrongdoing was found on her part, and no fines or sanctions will be issued. Crockett inclined her head. "Thank you, Your Honor." But Reed wasn't done. She stood, taking a breath, then faced the courtroom directly. "I'll be forwarding a formal report to the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct outlining today's proceedings. In addition to the suspension already enacted, I am recommending a full forensic audit of Judge Thomas's past cases, especially those involving politically sensitive rulings. Furthermore, I will submit a proposal for immediate emergency bias training for all sitting judges in the county, and will formally support the creation of an independent oversight committee made up of legal experts, community leaders, and nonpartisan ethics attorneys. Gasps rippled through the room. The gallery, once packed with skeptics and staffers, was now filled with spectators witnessing the turning gears of reform, possibly for the first time in real time. Reed turned back to Crockett. "Congresswoman, I owe you an apology. You came in here today expecting to be heard, and instead found yourself the target of abuse. That is unacceptable. And I thank you for your restraint, your clarity, and your courage." Jasmine gave a small nod, eyes sharp. "With all due respect, Judge Reed, I wasn't courageous. I was cornered. The system left me no choice but to fight back. That should never be the cost of justice." Outside the courthouse, a storm of media waited, rain now falling lightly on a row of news vans. Reporters huddled beneath umbrellas, their lenses fixed on the doors. When Crockett finally emerged, flanked by staff and trailed by murmurs of stunned court observers, the noise erupted. "Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe Judge Thomas will be disbarred? Was this politically motivated retaliation? Do you think the Republican Party will distance themselves from Thomas?" She stepped up to the podium hastily assembled on the courthouse steps. For the first time today, she allowed the full weight of the moment to settle in her shoulders. And then she spoke, not like a politician, not even like a lawyer, but like someone who'd had enough. "This isn't about Judge Thomas. This is about what happens when those with unchecked power become emboldened to abuse it. This is about what happens when partisan loyalty becomes more important than legal integrity. And this is about what it takes, still in 2025, for a black woman in power to be taken seriously in a courtroom." Flashbulbs popped. Her voice grew stronger. Today was a victory, but not a complete one. Because Thomas didn't act alone. He was protected by a system that rewards quiet compliance and punishes dissent. A system that sees oversight as a threat and accountability as an inconvenience. "That ends now." A reporter raised a hand. "Congresswoman, what reforms would you like to see beyond this courtroom?" Crockett's eyes flashed. "Mandatory judicial bias training. Real-time courtroom recording access for public review. Community-led oversight boards with subpoena power. Term limits for state-appointed judges. And most importantly, transparency. At every level of the process. If you wear the robe, You should fear abuse of power as much as any defendant fears the gavel." Cheers erupted from the crowd gathered behind the press line. Some activists, some constituents, many of them holding signs they'd made in a hurry that now felt prescient. "Justice is not partisan. Power to the people." Crockett stood her ground. That evening, the headlines roared. Crockett confronts corrupt judge and wins. Courtroom Showdown sparks statewide judicial investigation. Calls for reform. Explode after Crockett exposes political collusion in court. National networks picked it up within hours. Editorial panels debated the implications on live broadcasts. The footage of Judge Thomas being escorted out played on loop. Commentators tried to make sense of it, some praising Crockett's resolve, others fumbling with spin. But the truth was undeniable now. What was once whispered in private law circles had been dragged into the daylight. In the days that followed, the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct announced a full inquiry into Thomas's rulings. 2 previous cases were reopened. A wave of public pressure pushed legislators to fast-track a judicial transparency bill. Judges across the state suddenly found themselves asked about their political donors. The reforms Jasmine had spoken of, once dismissed as pipe dreams, were now policy proposals with bipartisan sponsorship. And Jasmine Crockett? She returned to Washington with more than vindication. She returned with momentum. Her speech in court became the opening statement in a House hearing on judicial ethics. A clip of her courtroom confrontation became the most shared political video of the month. She didn't ask for the spotlight, but she used it. In the end, it wasn't just about exposing a single judge. It was about daring to tell the truth in a room designed to silence dissent. It was about standing your ground when the system leans against you with its full weight. And it was about showing in real time what it looks like when justice isn't just a concept, but a fight that, this time, justice won.